Up till now, we have been talking about protein synthesis in eukaryotes. So that's us and whales and fish and birds and maple trees and everything else. And that's what we usually talk about protein synthesis, and we usually mean when somebody just says protein synthesis, they're usually talking about eukaryotes. When you take the air test in the spring, last year I swear half the questions were protein synthesis questions. It was all eukaryotic protein synthesis. So we're really only going to spend about 2 days talking about how it's different in bacteria, because this really ties into like things you need to know because it relates to antibiotic resistance. So, protein synthesis in bacteria. Well, the first question we want to ask ourselves is, what do we know about bacteria? I'll read it, then I'll shut up. What you know about bacteria. They are simple living things, emphasis on the simple. They have a singular circular piece of DNA, some ribosomes, a cell wall, and sometimes there's a protein capsule around the cell. Some have flagella. Those are whip-like structures that help them move. They look like a long tail. Some have cilia. Those are shorter, hair-like structures that also aid in locomotion. Locomotion is movement, how you move. So, some of the, and somebody in the other class had asked, what's locomotion? Locomotion, again, is just movement. Whether you walk, swim, fly, or wiggle through jelly on your belly. It's pretty much what bacteria do. That's locomotion. That's your form of locomotion. They're pretty simple. So a nice complicated organism such as yourself, you've got 46 individual pieces of DNA. They're all really long. You've got several feet of DNA in every cell in your body. Crazy. Bacteria have a single little, I always think of it as the DNA bracelet, and it's just a single loop. It's one piece of DNA, and it forms a complete circle. I mean, it looks more complicated than that. It's kind of jumbled up. But it's really pretty simple. They're very simple things. So the next question we might want to ask is, whoops, cancel, sorry. Do bacteria perform protein synthesis? And again, I'll read this and then shut up. Let's think it through. It's the best way to arrive at an answer to anything. Do bacteria have ribosomes? Yes. What do ribosomes do? Make protein. Do bacteria have protein in their cells? Yes. Then those protein must be made by bacterial ribosomes. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about those bacterial ribosomes. Bacteria do have ribosomes. Now, what was it that we said about bacteria? They're really, really simple. Bacteria are the stripped down version of a car. Bacteria are, the version of the car with no stereo, no Bluetooth for the cell phone. Heck, it might not even have a back seat. It's got an engine, it's got a driver's seat, it's got a steering wheel, and some pedals. It uses gas. That's about it. Bacteria are really simple life forms. They don't do a whole lot other than eat, move, make protein, and make more bacteria. Look at you guys. Look at you gloriously beautiful and complex beasties. Look at you. You should be rather impressed with yourselves. Seriously, you got eyes? You got this stuff on the top of your heads? You got all these fingers and toes and bones and skin and hearts and lungs and brains. You can make art. You can think. You can philosophize. You can tell jokes. You can tell knock-knock jokes. I mean, that's a pretty high stage of evolution if you ask me. You're amazing.
I mean, technically we can't do that. Our bodies can't.
Well, then we get into the whole mind-body divide thing. But, anyway, you're gloriously complex creatures. Bacteria aren't. they're pretty simple. There are no bacterial civilizations that we know of. They don't build buildings, they don't build roads or bridges, they don't tell knock-knock jokes. But they have ribosomes. And just like they are simpler than we are, their ribosomes are simpler than our ribosomes. So, if this is, it's a terrible drawing, you don't have to replicate that, but if that's a eukaryotic ribosome, a bacterial ribosome is more like that. They're smaller, there are sort of fewer moving parts, they're just, in general, they're simpler, just like bacteria in general are simpler kinds of living things than we are. So the answer to this is, yeah, they do perform protein synthesis. Now, here's the big question. Why do we care? Why do you care that bacteria perform protein synthesis? I'm glad you asked. Remember how we said there are a couple ways to kill a bacteria? And when we were talking about microbial antibiotic resistance early on, we were mostly focusing on breaking through the cell wall, knocking down the cell wall somehow to pop that bacteria like a overfilled water balloon. Got it? But there's actually a better way. Because that's kind of like just going after the thing with a flamethrower, which I realize from your answers you people are rather fond of. Light it on fire. But there are better ways to kill bacteria. And actually a lot of modern antibiotics attack bacterial protein synthesis. And it's a much more effective way to kill them in the long run. Now, do any of you plan on becoming pharmaceutical chemists? Do you know what a pharmaceutical chemist is? Person who makes drugs. They do. They make a ton of money. Coming out of school, somebody with a PharmD can probably expect to start out at about $100,000. Well, depending. If you're doing retail pharmacy, you're probably looking at $60,000 to $70,000 a year, depending on where you're at. If you're actually doing laboratory pharmaceutical chemistry, you're probably looking at 6 figures out of college. Now, getting there is brutal. Getting there is brutal. My husband's cousin, I'll pause this. We're going to stop here. We will pick up bacterial protein synthesis tomorrow and talking about how it's different and how antibiotics can attack this process to kill bacteria and not hurt you. Okay? Those of you who did not take the